That day, the whole world watched the stormtroopers of violent white supremacy act as the vanguard of a massive violent political insurrection against the government of the United States that smashed our windows, invaded our Capitol, wounded and injured more than 140 Capitol police officers and Metropolitan Police Department officers, and left several people dead. Let's be clear that the most dangerous domestic terror threat facing America today comes from the forces that attacked our government on January 6th.
That was Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin pointing out the government's failure in handling what is now the biggest national security threat facing our country today. Domestic extremism fueled by disinformation and the disgraced ex-president's lies about the election. Tackling that threat is now a top priority for the Biden administration after federal agencies under Donald Trump reportedly downplayed right-wing extremism in order to avoid embarrassing Donald Trump. And as we reported earlier this week, a career public servant and whistleblower is now able to speak out about the pressure he faced inside Donald Trump's DHS from his political appointees to bend the truth, hide the truth, suppress the truth. Brian Murphy filed a whistleblower complaint last September, alleging that he was punished for refusing to manipulate intelligence on 3 politically sensitive issues. They are white nationalism, election interference by Russia, and the situation on the southern border. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security denied the allegations when the complaint was first revealed. Joining us now is Department of Homeland Security whistleblower, the former senior DHS official, Brian Murphy. It is a pleasure to get to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's take these one at a time. I want to start with Russia. There was a sense after the Mueller investigation ended that Donald Trump conducted himself in a more emboldened manner. But what's amazing about your complaint is that the effort to suppress anything bad about Russia seemed to intensify, and especially as it pertained to the 2020 election. Can you just tell us what that was like and what exactly they didn't want to get out?
So thanks for the question. I think what's important to add is a little context so that the viewers will understand the details and the nuances and the pressure. So, I filed my first whistleblower complaint in 2018, about 4 or 5 months after I got to the department. And the second one I filed was in March of 2019. And by the time of September of 2020, I filed my third one. I think the pressure hit a tipping point. So the question you're asking is really important, but it's got to be put in the context where there was pressure on a number of fronts to suppress intelligence. Russia was probably the biggest of them as we got closer to the election, but it wasn't just Russian disinformation. It was all of those threats that you talked about happening at the same time.
So what happened to the information that you had? Did it make its way to local law enforcement? Did it die inside the intelligence community? Did it seep around Donald Trump? What happened to it? Did we sit on it?
Some of it we were able to get out, and a lot of it we weren't. There's a couple of reasons for that. Part of it, I think your last guest were talking about, was the structure. And the second part of it, meaning the intelligence community structure, they just didn't build on those parts of the intelligence community that could have done a more effective job and should have been resourced better to combat these threats. So Russian disinformation, for example, we had virtually no technology to capture what the Russians were doing and report on it at scale. That's one of the reasons why when I retired from DHS, I'm now fortunate enough to work for a company called Logically that can do this at scale, that works on disinformation, because it's just not about Russia. These other threats are tied to that as well. But I think back to your question, we just didn't have the resources. They were denied. What's not in my whistleblower complaint, but was a part of the background, was the denial by those officials to resource these programs.
Can you just tell me what a day of the suppressing of the intel looked like? You had data you collected. It came from, I imagine, a variety of sources. You went to put it in an assessment, and you gave it to who, and what happened next?
So there was literally nobody collecting, for example, on Russian disinformation, except for a very, a team that I ran within the department. That there was tremendous headwinds to get anything out. Every obstacle you can think of was put in the way. So as we found it, we were able to put things out, but initially, because the sensitivities around the classification level, we could only put it out so far, right, to those that had the access to get it. And, to kind of move forward in 2020, this is all out in the public now, but at that time, we knew full well that Putin had identified President Trump as someone to support and denigrate the Democratic candidates that were out there. Trying to get that information out across the intelligence community to law enforcement, there were just systematic barriers, and people were intimidated. The professionals were intimidated to do it. They knew that their target was going to be on their back.
So I want to read this from the complaint. In mid-May 2020, Mr. Wolf instructed you to cease providing intelligence assessments on the threat of Russian interference in the United States, and instead to start reporting on interference activities by China and Iran. Mr. Wolf stated that these instructions specifically originated from White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. So we know that a couple days before the election, I think it was the Friday or Saturday before the Tuesday election, Mr. Radcliffe did just that, the head of DNI. What did you do when you were asked to report on election interference activities from China and Iran and to suppress the ones on Russia?
Sure. I mean, they're just not the same. They were not at the same scale back then. Certainly, they present a small threat. But the statement from Chad Wolf, to me, and there were others present at the department that heard the same thing at different times or when we were together. So it's not just me that was hearing this from Chad Wolf, was that we were going to amplify China and Russia and exaggerate the threat that they posed simply because they were more aggressive against Trump in terms of their how they went after him. But there is no comparison, and there was no comparison to the scale of the Russian effort. So when you're referring to what the DNI said at that time, I find that ludicrous, quite frankly. I do not believe that a rational professional would have reached a similar conclusion. That is political manipulation at the highest levels.
Was he lying?
I don't know what's in his head. I can unequivocally tell you that from the information that I saw over 25 plus years of dedicated service, having access to the top tier intelligence this country has, and leading into the elections, unless something came in after I was relieved, there's just no way that stands the test of time. And there's no agency or people that I know about that would agree with that statement. And I know that statement got a lot of internal concerns expressed to it. But, I think I was listening to some of your last viewers, and my good friend Clint Watts and others were talking about it. The intimidation by people that did not have the capacity of the jobs that they were to execute the jobs they had from a political appointee perspective had seeped down pretty far into the ranks of government. So it was at the point where people just couldn't get the truth out because of these acolytes that believed in illiberal politics for the benefits of, a certain person or category or whatever it is of politics versus doing the right things for the right reasons.
I asked Colonel Vindman this question, and I ask you this because I really want to know what people from inside the national security apparatus believe. Because everything you describe is, and you're correct to put them back together. I tried to disaggregate them, but they are this toxic blend of disinformation and the Russian disinformation and the disinformation and the enabling of white supremacy. But it feels like the disinformation side is winning. What do you think?
Absolutely. Disinformation is not a threat that where the adversary, it's intentional. I think this is what people need to understand. This is not misinformation where someone makes a mistake. This is an intentional effort, a lot of times by nation states, but also by people within our own country to shape a narrative to create polarization within our society. So, we talk a lot about polarization within Congress and other areas, and certainly that's true from what I know. But from an intelligence perspective, the threat of disinformation is here to stay, and it is just getting worse. And it affects businesses in ways that I don't think they fully understand yet. I had said on another program and I'll repeat it here. I encourage the audience to go look at the 2044 threat prediction by the Director of National Intelligence, was put out a couple weeks ago. It talks about the threat of disinformation, and it's getting worse across this globe, and it's going to continue to run in that direction unless we build the resources in place and take the technology that's out there to do something about it.
Can you put that threat in the context of the last threat we sort of faced to the homeland that we really understood, and that was the threat of foreign terrorism? I mean, is disinformation a threat along the same level as that?
I think it's very, the end state will be different. This is a slower moving threat that's hard to realize. Where terrorism, at least from the, let's say, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, there's a clear enemy, even though they're not always easy to find. Domestic terrorism, similar. I mean, people break the law, you can see the violence. What we have with the disinformation threat is a much more settled threat that is harder for people, I think, to generally initially grasp. But once you kind of understand the threat, the resiliency that we need to build in, there are similar parallels. If you look at the countering violent extremism programs that are out there, there are some similar programs about how you counteract it. Again, I think that technology is there. The innovation is not within government. Government needs to be given the tools and the resources and the money to, quite frankly, invest in the technology that does exist to show what's happening at scale and build resources within our schools and our communities so that people understand to be very careful about what they believe on the internet. And it's easy to say, but when you demonstrate it to them, the light bulb does come on.